On soliciting feedback from the schools in the current pilot of the AccuPlacer on how they're doing intervention. I can tell you most all of them have adopted the use of the My Foundations Lab, which is an online component of intervention. There's a cost to that to the schools, so I don't know that every school will choose that, but we want to find out how is that working for them.
Is that the one that is actually accompanies AccuPlacer?
It's actually a Pearson product, but Pearson and College Board have a partnership to provide it for AccuPlacer.
Okay.
The department is also working on field guidance for RTI, response to instruction or intervention, for the middle schools and high schools. That's ongoing study, and that we're collaborating monthly. And our next item of business is for field guidance for all other aspects of 1005. We've spent a lot of time in these discussions really talking about this AccuPlacer College and Career Ready exam, but there are a number of other things, intricate things in 1005 that we want to bring forth to the board after our next meeting with the group I showed on the first slide. And then by April, like I said, we would bring back final guidance suggestions. Yes, Andrea. Sorry, Superintendent.
I'm curious, do we know what's happening at high schools in terms of electives, courses such as journalism or enrichment history or We the People history, and if those courses are starting to be dropped at the high school level because of the efforts to get more students AP credits or college dual credits?
That's really outside of this study that we've put forth, but I think as we bring these folks together to talk about how and when are you providing intervention, that could be a question I'd be happy to ask, because I can imagine my train of thought might be like yours, that you're thinking, well, if they're putting in time for intervention, what are they pulling those students from? And so we can kind of find out what the field is doing. I don't know if that's advice.
My thought is if a student is really struggling with writing, probably the best intervention would be a journalism class.
And that's what we hope to find out, is best practices such as that, unique systems that other schools are using.
So I'd be interested in finding out enrollment levels in high school electives around the state and how that's changed over the past 5 to 10 years.
I can add a little bit more to that, Andrea. I know the Indiana Council that we're looking at for CTE. We've been talking about 16 pathways and getting something similar to that in the high schools for all kids to have a pathway to a career. And with that, I think it's going to come conversation at some point regarding what do those 40 credits look like that students earn. You know, do we need to look at flexibility to those? Do we need to, and I actually share your concern regarding journalism in courses that aren't even worth credits. Many of our courses that kids want to enter into are not worth credits to them, but they take them anyhow. It doesn't add to their GPA. And that's another reason, the reason I'm bringing it out is for why some of them are diminishing, because they're not worth perhaps to go towards an actual degree. So I think the conversation later may come to this board regarding some recommendations, maybe even around CTE kinds of things that will look at the 40 credits and perhaps...
To clarify, my reference to journalism is not as a career path,
correct,
but as a path to learning
correct,
good writing skills.
I
and my
agree.
concern is losing these enriching electives, most of them in the liberal arts,
yes,
in the effort to make our children ready for the workforce that they'll be in for the rest of their lives. So my concern is I would like a pathway to a solid liberal arts core in high school before they go off to their careers.
yes. Dan?
Superintendent, do we have data that confirms the fact that enrollment, drama, art, journalism, let's take the whole wider approach, a world civ class you do not have to take to graduate, but do we have proof that the enrollments in that are going down? Do we have data?
I think that's what she just suggested, that we attempt
Well,
to gather.
I heard you say, I'm not questioning, I'm really asking the question. Do we understand what's happening?
I don't know that anything has been formulated to actually give a report like that, but I will check with my staff to see if we have the capability of doing that. Part of the issue is going to be that when the schools have their courses, that's all done at a local level, you know, deciding which courses and
Except we submit a course completion.
Correct, you do.
So you have access to all that data. So
yes, but
it should be
I don't know that it's
public.
been compiled like that.
Correct.
I'd like it to be. That'd be great.
Be interesting.
We submit it each year, so it is there.
Well, along with that question, it'd be interesting to see if some of the elective, like a journalism, if they tie some of the learning objectives, cognitive or otherwise, back to standards. In other words, can you keep the elective and have it feed the goals we have for students and the outcomes we have? And because that is very important discussion. We don't want to narrow up the curriculum in our effort to have
I'll
standards.
have my department start to pull some information on that. Is there a motion with respect to revised HEA 1005 remediation guidance?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Ray Albert,
Yes.
Ian Osmer,
Yes.
David Prater,
Yes.
Gordon Henry,
Yes.
Andrea Neal,
No.
Sarah O'Brien,
Yes.
Brett Oliver,
Yes.
Tony Walker is absent, DJ Watts,
Yes.
Jerry Wicker. Yes. Superintendent Ritt.
Yes.
9-1.
The next item on the agenda is Common Core Standards Review and Evaluation. We are going to have the follow-up presentation from Friday from John Wolf and Michelle Walker from the Department of Education, and therein may follow an action.
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz and members of the board. Nice to see you again. I feel like we were just here. One of the things we talked about last week that we got started down the road, what are we actually doing with regard to our Common Core Standards Review? And actually, a staff that's here with us today can speak best about that because they're actually working with the educators in the field. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview about what their work is, or a piece of what their work is, I should say, and then invite them up to talk a little bit more specifically and give you a picture of the work that's being done. So some of these we already looked at when I was pointing the red arrow at Brad by mistake last week. So I won't go into great detail, but just give you some background knowledge that certainly anytime we have a significant change in standards, we do a review, a thorough review. And an example of that would be science. The Science 2010 standards, when those were adopted, they were drastically different from what we had before. So we did undergo a thorough review of those standards, developed a new blueprint for our test, aligned items to that blueprint, created the assessment, had an operational test. And you might remember earlier this fall looking at the cut scores and approving those for the science assessment. Obviously, we work as a collaborative team in terms of folks in the College and Career Readiness Curriculum Office, as well as assessment, content experts to ensure that both the standards, the expected things that students should know be able to do, as well as the assessment are aligned. And we also want to give guidance to teachers. So one of the things we created were what we call instructional and assessment guidance documents so that we could help teachers really figure out those curricular priorities and not tell them how to teach, but what would need to be taught to make sure that students had an opportunity to learn. So that's something that we've been doing on a regular basis. We review it and provide additional guidance each spring. We've done that probably for about the last 4 or 5 years. It is something that we want to always be transparent to help teachers know how important is each standard and what are the skills and knowledge pieces that students need to be able to do to demonstrate that they have learned the standards. One of the things we like to explain is that every standard is not created equal. Some content is more important than others, and trying to help teachers be aware of that so that, again, we can be transparent. So one of the things we do provide is actually some thorough guidance with regard to our current standards, how the Common Core that we're currently using has subsumed Indiana academic standards, and then the additional standards, I call them solitary. Some folks refer to them as independent, but any indicators, and they're actually indicators rather than standard level, but any indicators that don't align to Common Core in that grade level, because many of them actually do align to College and Career Ready standards, but in a different grade level. But we do call out those ones that are independent or solitary, if you will, to make sure that the teachers are aware this is something that students may be asked about on ISTEP, so we want to be transparent and let you know that it is important. So want to get into now more the work of the technical review committees, and again invite staff to come up in just a moment, talk a little bit more about that. So one of the really critical pieces of work that these review committees are doing, obviously, is identifying what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that students need in Indiana at each grade level in ELA and math. And as they're looking at that, what about these solitary indicators? Are they pieces of information that in Indiana we believe should be part of our curriculum or part of our standards? And so looking at what we know needs to be what we call opportunity to learn, give them an opportunity to learn it so that they'll be aware of the skills and have the knowledge before it's assessed on a high-stakes assessment, and identifying what those are and having the technical review committees be sure that they're reviewing all of Indiana's standards, but also the solitary indicators. One of the key things we're asking the technical review committee members to do in their work is to help us identify, are any of these skills in the solitary group, if you will, ones that we want to see continuing on into the future? Should they be assessed beyond 2014-15? And if so, we want to include them. And if we don't think they're important for students to know and be able to do in Indiana, then we would want to drop them off in terms of our expected list for learning. This print I know is very small, but this is the preamble to one of the guidance documents for teachers, where it talks about the instructional and assessment guidance. What is the purpose? Certainly the purpose isn't to tell teachers how to teach, because that's really the art and science of teaching. But knowing what is important, what students are going to be held accountable for in terms of what they know and are able to do. So the beginning of each of the ELA and math sections does start with a preamble. At the end of each of those is a summary of the information contained in the pages between the one you just saw and this slide. This slide lists our current standards and subsumes the Indiana academic standards where there are connections. And at the very bottom, not pointing at Brad, but pointing right over here, if I can get my pointer to work. The very bottom of the slide, and I must not be pointing very well, but if you look across the bottom of this slide, you can notice indicators. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Vanna. Indicators at the bottom. Those are the solitary ones. Those are ones that are not subsumed into our current standards, but are part of the Indiana academic standards that we had in place before, that we know could be on our assessment, so we want to be transparent. Again, referred to those as solitary. So this is an example of English language arts in grade 6. We have those for all grades 3 through 8, and we also establish those for grade 2, which I think might be next on the agenda, so I don't want to steal any thunder from that part. But what I want to do next is invite a couple of our staff members who are here that can talk with you about what they've been doing in their technical committee with the educators in the field.
And I urge the board to ask questions.
Absolutely.
When we have our experts up here, because I know there's been questions about the actual process and wanting to be sure that it's going to do what we want it to do. Because the review of standards this year is extremely controversial and important, and we're right. And at the last meeting, I did say to the board, I welcome suggestions to the department regarding the actual process for reviewing these standards.
Heavy lifting. Good work.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let me do some formal introductions. Here to share with you about English language arts is going to be John Wolf from our College and Career Readiness Curriculum team, as well as Aaron Thompson from Assessment. And to share about mathematics is Ben Kemp, and he's from Assessment as well. Oh, and Jim Mirabelli. Sorry, Jim. And Jim Mirabelli from Assessment. So should we start with ELA?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a little sorry. First of all, we'd like to start off talking about how our committees were selected. We have educators who are represented from across the state, and we have asked schools then to provide us with names of educators they felt would be able to provide assistance with this process, who are familiar with the standards and can best represent where they are with their understanding of the standards and help us with this process. And the teachers were selected by those schools. The schools were contacted based on some of the criteria that we use when we create other assessment committees, where we are looking for different parts of the state. We look at the north, the middle, and the south. We also look at urban, rural, and suburban. And then we also look at schools with a high poverty level versus a low poverty level. And so we have a representation from across the state of those based on a formula that was created to determine where those, how much of the students of the state that represents. So those teachers have been working with us now for a few weeks, and we have created documents for them to review, starting with some guiding questions, which guide them to apply to each standard ideas about progression and clarity of language, and in just general comments. We don't try to limit them as far as feedback that they're providing on each of the standards. And so far for English language arts, K through 12 educators have reviewed about half of the English language arts content area literacy standards.
So I think the major piece is, going back to what Erin was saying, we do have guiding questions, but it's not limited to those questions only. We want that committee to make sure that they are looking at it and making sure that they have questions that they want to address as well. We do have a K2 band, a 3-5 band, and a 6 through 12. But the standards are a progression as far as they can see the full progression while they're reviewing them as well. So when they go into the secure Google Docs just for the committee, they can go in and submit their revisions or their comments. And then we have webinars that are scheduled where we actually have on their own time. And they've been lasting about 2 hours approximately each time we meet. And so they can discuss and look at all of the comments and then come up with a final recommendation. Once we have all of the recommendations completed, then they go to the advisory council from there.
Are they just looking at these standards, or are they looking at previous standards, other model standards, other templates, or are they just evaluating the words in front of them?
So I think the important piece is going back to what Michelle Walker was talking about earlier. In 2010, we adopted the Common Core standard, as our standards in Indiana. And then at that point, we ended up taking the Indiana academic standards and subsuming those standards. So those standards are in the Common Core. So there are those standalones that she was talking about, those independents that they will be reviewing to make sure that, we are needing, if we need them, or if they might not exist after we finish the review. So,
Common Core, how would I know which those were? They don't appear to be highlighted.
Andrea,
Yeah.
the Common Core standards that you have, Indiana currently is teaching those, and in addition, they're teaching Indiana academic indicators that were not included in Common Core. So we're teaching a much broader perspective. And when the crosswalk was done under the previous administration, there was a great deal of overlap between our Indiana academic standards and the Common Core. So what we see in front of us, it's beyond that, is what I'm saying, Andrea. So what we're reviewing is everything that we're teaching, okay? So we're reviewing all of the Indiana academic standards that didn't fit with Common Core and the Common Core. So in essence, we are reviewing everything.
Are we also reviewing what we're not teaching?
And what do you mean by what we're not teaching?
Items from, for example, the 2008 language arts standards that are not reflected in the Common Core or in those indicators.
They would be included in whatever grade 8, the indicators of those standards would be included if they weren't already encompassed in Common Core. There was a total crosswalk between Common Core and the Indiana academic standards. Carrie?
Right. So when I have had the opportunity to see it, the reviewers are given, Andrea, like a list of the Common Core standards, and it's on a spreadsheet, and they're given the Common Core standards with a comment column where they're allowed to make comments. They're not comparing the standards per se. They're not saying, here's the Indiana standard, here was the Common Core standard, this is where I feel it's better, or this is where they're different. They're a list of the standards with a comment box next to them where they can say, I don't like this standard, I don't understand this standard, but it's not a comparison of, which I envisioned it as a comparison. I envisioned a comparison of here's the Common Core, here's the Indiana, which is better when there are holes and gaps. And it's not like that. It's, here are the standards we're currently teaching. What do you think about them?
And it includes both Common Core and the Indiana academic standards that we're teaching.
But it's not a comparison of,
No.
do you like this or this one, or which one do you feel is better? It's, what is your comment on all of these standards?
Okay.
Does that?
That's clarified. Brad?
I'll yield to the chair on this. I'd like to make some comments, but I don't want to interrupt the presentation. But some of my comments I intend to make will speak directly to what Andrea and Carrie are getting into. But I will defer to the chair when it's an appropriate time. I don't have questions because I met with staff yesterday, but I do have some comments that I'd like to offer for the board's sake.
So I just want to be sure everybody understands what the committees are looking at. They're looking at a combination of Indiana academic standard indicators as well as Common Core adopted in 2010. So they're looking at both, but what they're not doing is a comparison because previous work did the crosswalk already as to which ones overlapped. And so we're reviewing everything that teachers are teaching, which is what the committees are supposed to be charged with doing under statute, reviewing currently what we are teaching.
And an important piece, I think, Superintendent Ritz, what you were speaking about, is that the actual correlation, as you can see, if you would look at like 6.W.S, you can see the parentheses right underneath, and you can see where those academic standards actually were subsumed into that,
Yes.
and they align to that standard from the Common Core.
And maybe it would help if you guys, I don't know, if you had, the hard thing about putting something like this together, which is put together, is that it doesn't say what all the standards are. I mean, it would be just, so we have numbers.
Yes, the first part of this is actually the last page of a larger document.
Correct.
Where the standards are spelled out, where you see the text of the Common Core standards, and you also see the text of the Indiana indicators as they align, or maybe do not align at the bottom. The way it's organized, you'll see the first one there. I'll give you an example from reading informational text. So the reading standards for informational text, those are the 10 standards for the Common Core. Underneath, you'll see the Common Core where it says IAS 626, 627. Both of those are Indiana indicators that are also both reading informational text, and they also align very well with that standard. The ones beneath that you see at the very bottom, like 612, 622, an example of one of those, and I don't remember the number of it off the top of my head, is following directions in a technical manual. That's from the Indiana academic indicators. That does not align or fit in with any of those informational text standards for Common Core. So what we would be doing with the committees is determining, does something like that standard of looking at that standalone there at the bottom of looking at following directions in technical text. Is that something that needs to remain since it's not currently a part or aligns with the Common Core standards?
And Carrie, that was filling the holes. Those bottom things down there are filling the holes from the Common Core to our standards, and they're all there. In fact, when we began this review process, I made sure that that's what we were going to be doing and that we were going to be looking at all Indiana academic standard indicators in addition to the Common Core. What might be very helpful to the board is to actually give you all the links, the link pieces to access so that you can, Andrea, see all of what is being taught. And it's very clear about the Indiana academic standards and the Common Core. It's both.
And I understand, and last time you told us about the crosswalk, I just wanted everybody to understand when they're reviewing them, what they're seeing. They're seeing, a list of the standards with a comment box. It's not a which is better or what do you think?
But they're commenting on all of them, either staying, yes, they're commenting on all of them in equal.
Because I've seen it, I just wanted everybody else to
Sure.
visually.
Sure.
And that's what the statute asks for, is where the
Yes.
limit is. So they want
Yes.
to move.
The statute asks us to work from the current. Now, I will say, because we're reviewing standards now, and we were in the process of actually transforming or transitioning from our Indiana academic standards to the Common Core. We are in a perfect position now to actually, that's what we're doing. We are actually looking at everything. If we had been reviewing standards after full implementation of Common Core, then the charge to the committee would just be to review the Common Core. But that's not where we are. We are in the middle of transition. We are teaching both Common Core and Indiana academic indicators that were already, indicated on how we needed to actually transition. David, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Of course, the decision about adopting Common Core or Indiana standards or a hybrid of both potentially will be done by the board later on this year. And this is great work. This is providing a framework for us to understand what's in each. But I just want to publicly state that this is no indication, at least for me or probably the board, which direction we're going in that adoption cycle later on this year.
Actually, that's true. I mean, totally true. But what we're also providing, and we'll talk about later, is a higher education panel to work alongside the revisions process to inform that, because no matter what the standards look like at the end, they must be college and career ready. And in order for them to be approved college and career ready, they need to have gone through the higher education process to make sure that that's appropriate. So even if it came down to the board saying we're just going to have the Common Core and that's all we're going to do, no changes to what we're doing now in 2010, I'm telling you, I'm having the higher ed panel actually go through that entire process to approve them to be college ready, whatever the changes are, whatever they look like. And that's vitally important to me, that the higher education have a large role in making sure that our standards are college and career ready, because
Right.
that's what's written in statute,
Right.
that we have college and career ready standards as a result of 1427. Dan?
I have a question that I don't know exactly how to ask, and I doubt there's an answer, but I'm intrigued with it. We call this a core, and I'm hearing Andrea's eloquence here on what's not there. Is the core, and you'd have to do it in the main, if you teach the core curriculum, and then, because you're going to have assessments on it, what's left in terms of time and energy for teacher-student curriculum? So is the Common Core in the main take up 95% of a student's educational effort? Is it 60%? What's left for, again, drama and art, or extending learning, or taking, you might know the basic standard to pass a test, but do you have a rich development of what went on in world civilization development, et cetera? So it's kind of interesting. It'd be an interesting question to know what does it consume in terms of the educational resource of time, effort, money of a teacher. I don't know that that's out there. It intrigues me, though. Is it really core, or is it all encompassing? Is it half? It's an intriguing question.
Well, I can say that we're actually embarking on review of standards for two areas, language arts and mathematics. And I think that concern is always in the back of mind of the educators as they're going through this review process. Are the standards overwhelming and we can't possibly get them done? Are they, I'm sure that's in the back of all the educators as they're actually giving their comments and talking about review, and probably, is there redundancy, in certain areas, or does it have a good vertical alignment with it? So I'm sure all those things are, when educators look at things, they've been teaching them. And that's the other nice thing about the review right now, is that they've been teaching both sets. So they have a pretty clear indication about their time and commitment and what might be appropriate and repetition and those types of things. Brad, did you have a question?
I have comments, so
Okay.
I don't want to interrupt the presentation, but I'm worried about time getting away from us, but I have some things definitively I want to speak that tap all these areas, but
Okay.
I had a chance to meet with the
Well,
department.
let's
so
hear with math.
Well, with the math groups, a lot of what I'll say kind of echoes the process that the ELA group did. We also have, instead of 3 groups, we have 4 groups, where ELA used K2, 3.5, and 6.12. We're using a K2, 3.5, 6.8, and a high school group because the high school standards are set apart from the 6.8. And so a lot of that process that they use, though, is the same. We are using Google Docs, and we have had a lot of great discussion just based on that because, again, the reviewers are able to see, not only make comments themselves, but they have commented on comments that have already been made. And so going into the discussions that we have live, they've been able to really go into that well-informed with what everyone else's their thoughts are and what, and so it's really helped our discussions as we've gone along. And so, again, we're about 50% done, I would say, 50 to 80% done, depending on the groups. We're actually working on some of the meetings this week. So as we continue to move along, we've gone pretty good ways forward through this. And I think Jim will speak to a little bit of kind of what we've seen so far.
Sure. One of the points I just want to clarify, too, is that there are 4 groups. I think Ben mentioned we have our K2 group, our 3.5 group, 6.8, and then high school. And so they're really charged with looking at those grades in depth so that they're looking to see if the learning is progressing within the grade appropriately, but also, vertically across grades. The other piece of that is like our 3.5 group, for example, is also going to be looking at grade 2 and grade 6. So the groups will look at a grade before their main, set of grades to review, and then also, looking ahead as well, just to make sure that the progressions seem appropriate. Probably the neatest thing I think that we've heard from teachers is that the educators are really crying for support documents. That the math standards seem very appropriate, but that there's a need to have some sort of a support document so that they want to do a good job, right? They want to do the best job possible, but they need some help in terms of clarity of some of the standards, also just sample tasks that might clarify the expectations of the standards, as well as some real exemplary lessons. And then there are some, there's some definite need for professional development in terms of, there are some shifts from our standards, our previous standards to right now. Probably in my eyes and what I hear the most, the biggest lift is around conceptual understanding. And so I think that would be a definite area where professional development would be needed, as well as incorporating the math standards for mathematical practice with math content. What does that look like in the classroom? What does it look like at different grade levels? So I think that's probably a kind of a summary of where we're at right now with the review.
And so what I thank you very much. Thank you.
I have a question for them.
Yes.
One question for you. In the discipline areas, there are a number of national professional organizations, and in mathematics, I believe it's the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. Mm-hmm. And what role did that organization's standards play in your review? Because it sounds like we're focusing in on Common Core and Indiana standards, but there are a whole set of standards out there. So did these national standards play any role in your deliberations?
Well, some of those organizations actually informed the standards themselves. So
okay.
We're not, I guess, tapping into them right now, but they informed the standards themselves.
And they could be subsumed in the standards that you're having your panel look at?
Like the NCTM standards?
Correct.
Yes.
Great.
And I would say that we're not far enough along in the process, perhaps, to get that totally completed. But we are required by statute. The board has a clear obligation by statute to be sure that the standards are clear, concise, jargon-free state academic standards that are compared to national and international academic standards. So we have a responsibility as an actual review committee to be sure that we're looking at those national standards and seeing if we have some alignment. So yes, that is part of what we do.
Super.
We should thank staff. Great job. Thank you very much.
They're awesome. That's all I can say. I want to introduce Leslie Fadum. She's going to talk with you about another part of the review process, which is the advisory group. And then I'll conclude by talking about our college and career readiness panel. And then I know Brad wants to share some thoughts. Leslie.
Before Leslie begins, the Department of Education, the state superintendent, shall appoint an academic standards committee composed of subject matter area teachers and parents during the period in which subject area is ongoing revision. And so I've expanded that process actually to not only include a committee appointed of that type of group, but also, excuse me, is there any water? But also to provide an advisory committee in addition to be sure our process is going to be going forth in a good manner, as well as providing a higher education panel that's going to work alongside. So the importance of these standards has been heightened, and I felt the need to provide 2 additional pieces to what's written here in statute. Go ahead, Leslie.
Thank you. So the advisory committee members are comprised mainly of higher education faculty, as well as some high-level administrators with curriculum and instruction expertise, and parents. We had our first introductory webinar on October 24th, and at that time we went over the timeline, the proposed timeline for this review process, and talked about the roles and responsibilities of the advisory committee, which we saw as first of all, informing the process itself, reviewing what the technical review committee's work was going to be, looking at the templates that they had assembled for the actual review, the guiding questions, and just making sure that there was nothing that was missing or should be changed about the process itself. And all of the feedback that we got, both with the English language arts and the mathematical advisory committees, was that they felt the process was appropriate. They really didn't have anything to add to that. So our next step is that we're going to get those comments and suggestions and revisions from the technical reviewers, and at that time the advisory committee is going to look at those. They will help to kind of compile them and categorize them, and then they can also put their own expertise into the process in terms of, is this an appropriate suggestion? Is there something that they feel is critical to be added that was not considered by the technical reviewers?
So what we're looking at currently is really a 3-tier process. We have a technical review, we've got an advisory committee that's actually reviewing them as well, and then we have a higher education panel that will be reviewing them as well. So I wanted to have plenty of layers to be sure that changes went through a process by which they were going to be deemed college and career ready. And so thank you very much, Leslie. Did you have anything else to say?
No.
Okay, I thought you were
a
concluding.
question.
Okay, thanks. All right, Brad, you had comments?
Yes, but I know, Dr. Walker, were you going to make a closing comment?
Okay, so
Thank
sorry.
you. No problem. We had the unique opportunity and pleasure to meet with Brad yesterday. Really enjoyed the conversation. And one of Brad's suggestions that we are changing our practice is involving that advisory group that Leslie spoke of earlier to look at the content that's being recommended or that have concerns from the technical group. So Brad, thank you so much for sharing that, and we wanted everyone to know that we have incorporated that change. So as you probably know, states are required to adopt a set of college and career ready standards, and states have two options. They can adopt the Common Core, or they can adopt their own set of standards, and they do need to be deemed college and career ready standards by the higher ed institutions within that state. And as Superintendent Ritz has already commented, we do have a part of our of our review beyond the advisory group that is a college and career ready panel. And one of Superintendent Ritz's priorities is to make sure that even if we adopt a hybrid model and it's not more than 15% different or whatever it is, that we do still want to include higher ed. So we are going to utilize the higher ed panel, or what we call our CCR panel, even if we don't need to, because we feel like we want that transparency and support. So we're excited about working with them as well. I know Brad wanted to make a few comments, and I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Superintendent. I wanted to make a couple comments as a board member to my colleagues on the board. This has been a concern of mine for some time, and you're aware of that. We talked today about getting the cart in front of the horse. I would submit that our standards are the horse. They drive everything, and they drive the nature of our assessment system. They ultimately drive the accountability system on which we will base some decisions of schools and teachers. And so getting the standards right are paramount. That being said, as I've looked at House Enrolled Act 1427, it seems to me like the responsibility of the board, as has been expressed here today, is to adopt college and career readiness standards. And so I want to make a couple comments, but I want to preface this by saying I do appreciate the work that's been done by the department. I also want to acknowledge the work that was done by the previous board, because I know when I make some certain comments today, it may seem like I'm saying, well, why did we go the route we did in 2010? But I'm looking at it from the standpoint of what does the House Enrolled Act require? And if we talk about adopting college and career readiness standards by July 1st, and I think about that, I have to think about the process. And I have some concerns with the process. We've heard the process articulated very well, and there's a lot of the parts of the process I agree with. The concerns that I have right now are primarily about not leveraging higher education subject matter experts earlier in the process. And let me explain what I shared with the department staff yesterday just briefly. I agree with the approach of having cell groups of practitioners looking at the standards and the clusters that you're doing, K to 2, 3 to 5. Jim, you mentioned those look well. What I would add to what you shared yesterday, because this is important, is they're also looking at a grade level below that. So if they're a 3-5 range, they're looking at grade 2, and then they're also looking at grade 6. Best practice would support. That's a very good practice. Where I would question is the nature we're doing is we're giving basically a graphic organizer, if you will, with some guiding questions, and we're asking field practitioners to evaluate that. As somebody who helps prepare those folks, they are very highly trained in how to take an existing standard and develop it into an instructional lesson. It is a different task, though, when you start to evaluate the appropriateness of a standard for content and then for things like clarity and whether or not there's bias and things of this nature. So that being said, a couple of questions I asked of the department staff yesterday had to do with not only who was on the committees, but along with the process, I learned some things. And one of the things that concerned me is that while there are higher ed folks being consulted, and they will eventually be involved even in more greater detail into the process, the initial review of the standards are being largely done by practitioners and curriculum development specialists. That's important. I'm not saying that that shouldn't happen. That is important. But a subject matter expert looking at that might see the standard differently or might catch something in terms of the actual content itself. You raised, David, the issue of NCTM and NCTE. I asked a very similar question because rather than a graphic organizer with open-ended guiding questions where we're collecting responses, typically in this kind of work when you evaluate a standard, you have kind of a baseline that all the panelists are working from that they can agree on. NCTM and NCTE, the National Councils for Teacher of Mathematics and Teachers of English, have up on their website a set of baseline standards that represent statements. They don't say how to teach, but they have another category for that. But they, and their standard statements say, these are things cognitive, what kids should know, and here are effective things that they should be able to do. And they tend to be very free of bias. They're very stripped down and they're very organized, and you oftentimes will see states adopt standards around that construct. I raise that because that's not the kind of evaluation that's being done. I'm raising this as a concern as a board member because in talking with two of the legislatures that sponsored that, what is now a law, we received a letter from, I believe, Senator Schneider and from Representative Rose, and in talking with at least Senator Schneider, it was clear that in the language of the original House Enrolled Act, there was to be an evaluation of the standards done by July 1st. And we can debate the report we got, whether it was an actual evaluation or whether it was a chronology. But an evaluation, in my opinion, means that somebody used an objective set of criteria and a qualified panel group went through and said, yes, we affirm that these are college and career ready. It is also true that the federal government says we could adopt Common Core, and the board elected to do that in 2010, and that's one way to satisfy that. But we also have an opportunity here that I don't want to lose in House Enrolled Act 1427. And that is, we have the opportunity, if we truly do an evaluation, and we had baseline criteria that an evaluation is done, to look at the best of both worlds to come up with a set of standards. We are allowed to modify our standards by 15%. But we can also go further than that. We talked yesterday with the department staff. We can clarify existing language. For example, there could be a Common Core standard that says the student must use multiple strategies to solve double-digit addition. Well, that's kind of vague, because the old standard would have said the student will use a standard algorithm to do that same task. It wouldn't leave it open to multiple interpretations of how to get that done. I use it as one example where I would like to see the board have provided and still provide more guidance to the process. Because ultimately when we have public hearings, I think we're going to find out that this is probably of greater concern than what we realize, because I get more letters right now around the issue of the standard adoption than I do about A to F or anything else, and I know you have to be getting the same emails. And there's a real concern right now, even amongst teachers, of are we teaching this, are we teaching that? And I think what we need to get to is a set of standards that go into a public hearing that says, this is what we're proposing to be the college and career readiness standards. And they may very well, as we said, be a combination of both. I say all that to say that when I've tried to move this forward, it's been difficult to get information. It's been difficult to have, as a board member, a role to play in influencing how this work gets done. And I say that because when I look at the statute, the obligation rests with the board to adopt those standards. And so last time we were here on November the 8th, we ran out of time. And I asked if I would be able to work with SBOE staff to form a resolution. And I did draft that, but I did revise it in the wake of meeting with department staff yesterday and having some brief conversation with the superintendent. I did distribute that to you, and I would like to, if the chair will allow me, to just speak briefly to what I'm asking for and why I'm asking for it in the resolution.
Well, I'm trying to figure out whether to make my comments now or after you make a motion, because I too have seen your motion, and perhaps I need to speak very pointedly to what it is that you're actually doing in the resolution.
Since I'm bringing that as a motion, could I walk through my 4 resolutions on the second page just briefly so I can summarize those on page 2? There are 4 things that I'm asking specifically in that motion.
And if you go through those, then I guess I can provide my comments at that time.
Sure, that'd be great. So I just asked the board if you have that copy. It was sent as an embedded link in the agenda, and I appreciate that being done, but there was some revisions made to try and clarify it. What I tried to do here was to do 2 things. In the first part of the first page is to work with SBOE staff to clarify what is the statutory obligations of the board related to the issue of the standards adoption, and that's pretty much all of page 1. I'm not going to take time to read all through that. I really want to talk about what I'm asking in the motion, what we're resolving. The thing that I expressed yesterday, by keeping the higher ed folks out to the very end, my concern is that if the standards get passed off to them and they do see one of these anomalies, what do they do at that point? And does that further back the process out? And while from a statute standpoint we have to July 1st, from a logistical standpoint, that's probably not a great idea since we need to get the assessments figured out, we got to get A to F figured out, and so we need to get the hearings in sooner. So the first thing I'm asking this that we would resolve is that we would conclude the hearings by no later than January 2014, so we can immediately get into the assessment discussions, hopefully wrap that up, and by then finalize A to F. So that's the first.
So if I could comment
Please.
at that point.
Sure.
If we have the hearings regarding the standards that early, they will not see revisions. The revisions won't be totally completed by then. And so what the hearings will be, they won't be seeing, nobody attending the hearings will actually see revisions that are being suggested. So the hearings would probably be more like the legislative hearings that were conducted, whether it's Common Core or no Common Core, and hearing that debate. It's my firm belief that debate's been heard in 3 hearings already with the Legislative Commission, and that the reason that it was suggested in the timeline, which I have brought to the board on 3 different occasions, I suggested that it occur in early February so that they will actually see the revisions to the standards, and that the comment, then the hearing process then has bearing on the actual standards that are actually being suggested.
Second.
Can I ask a question? So will the like public comment be limited to people who only are going to talk about the standards?
Well, the hearings are supposed to be about the standards.
And I understand that, but when I envision many of the same people at the public hearings coming and speaking again to us, feeling as if they want to say what they had talked about before. I'm questioning if they'll come and truly speak to the revisions in the standards, or if they'll come and speak to the overview again.
Well, we won't have the revision process won't have been completed yet. And I guess that's my point. That not the whole revision process, but we won't know what are the suggested changes. And so I was hoping that the actual hearings were going to be about that people coming would actually be able to see the revisions and have input into that.
Did you envision that being completed early February you were talking?
Yes, I believe the timeline that I gave to you talked about early February. And remember that we wanted everything done by April, and if we could back it up even to March, we would. But this is not a quick process, and we got to make sure that we get it right.
I would just point out that, I've never, over the years and 20 years of being in Indiana, I've been to a number of the public hearings. Public hearings are fluid, and one of the things that is going to happen, and this always happens in a public hearing, is they're going to change as a result of the public hearing. I mean, there will be revisions, that's true, but they're going to happen even after a public hearing. So this notion that they have to be perfect at the time of the hearing, I would challenge that, because I've always seen things in draft form. That's what goes in front of the public for their input, and I suspect they'll have much to say about that before we finalize that. But I'm just simply saying, if we don't conclude that public intake process, by the time we make the revisions based off the public testimony, we're pushing now into February and March, and we're getting into a window that's extremely tight. And so that's why I've recommended we resolve to try and get public testimony on what the public wants to see happen in their career and college ready standards done by the end of January. The second part of that resolution is to inform, for the board to be able to provide more direction in terms of the process being done. I think the department's on the right track, but where I would like to see us, and I've put these in here as 2 and 3, is this ability to use more subject matter experts at the higher university level sooner rather than later, having them evaluate alongside our practitioners in the field, and also leaving open the possibility that there are third-party providers that do this kind of work. The board in the past has had folks like Fordham look at our standards, and they've rated those. You can go pull those ratings and see how they've done that. I think that should be resolved, that we want to leave that available to us as we're working through this process to its final point of having standards. 3, I do think it's important that since the board is statutorily responsible, that board staff help us to coordinate on some specific areas, particularly of getting the hearings organized and seeking that input that I just framed, and then also, if it's necessary, the contract out to third party. That may become necessary. We may want to see that kind of, and that's been done in the past with boards. I know that's been done here in Indiana, which takes me to the 4th resolution, which is simply that there are funds available through the board that I think we should consider if needed to expend, and I've included that in this resolution. And those are the 4 action steps that I'm moving and asking for a second on.
Second.
Excuse me, we were in a discussion period, and I didn't ask for a motion yet.
Point of order.
So if
Is
we
there
could,
a motion on the floor?
I would like to move
excuse
board
me,
member made a motion.
excuse me. First of all, I need to address the motion itself, and I wanted to do that before you made the motion, because I want to be sure that you understand what my action is going to be regarding the motion.
Wouldn't that be discussion, though?
No,
Isn't there
we
a
were.
motion, and then we can discuss it?
David, Brad and I said we would discuss each one of these points, and then he was going to move into the motion. And I have not had a chance to talk about the discussion of each of these points, and so I'm going to discuss each of these points because I want the full board to understand what action they might be actually taking. By statute, here is the role of the board regarding revision of standards. And this is the role of the board every time we do a standards review process. And it's not really just the 1427. This is how we do standards review. So the adoption of the academic standards, the state board shall adopt, and I did part of this, shall adopt clear, concise, and jargon-free state academic standards that are comparable to national and international standards. These academic standards must be adopted for each grade level from kindergarten through grade 12 for English language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science. Then it goes on. It says, the department shall develop academic standards for the following subject areas for each grade level from kindergarten through grade 12. English language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science, and other subjects as determined by the department. Second section, next session. The department shall revise and update academic standards for each grade level from kindergarten through grade 12 and in each subject area listed in section 2 of this chapter. At least once every 6 years, the revision must occur on a cyclical basis. The next section. The state superintendent shall appoint an academic standards committee composed of subject area teachers and parents during the period in which a subject area is ongoing revision. Next section. An academic standards committee shall submit recommendations on academic standards for a subject area to the Education Roundtable established by the law for review by the Education Roundtable. And then it goes forward. The motion that you have presented, and I understand, and I reached out, and I am more than willing to put the higher education process, and we already moved it up in the timeline to make it to be more robust than what it is that we already have going on. I am more than happy to do that. But this board resolution says that the board authorizes the board staff to coordinate the board's responsibilities and activities with respect to the standards evaluation process in consultation with the staff at the Education Roundtable and the department and the Commission for Higher Education to do all of the things that the department has a responsibility to do. Organizing, I don't care if you organize your public hearings, and you can go forth and you can do that. And honestly, you can do it anytime you want to. I don't even need to play a role in that, because the board's supposed to hold 3 hearings. So if you want to hold your hearings and decide today when you want to hear them, you may go forward. But regarding the process that is outlined in statute that the department does, we gather the input from the K-12 and the post-secondary subject matter teachers. We are conducting the review process. There's a reason for the check and balance that we have regarding standards, because it's supposed to be a check and balance. So we give the recommendations, we go through a process. I have been more than willing to gather input on how that process works, but the department is charged of that process to actually review the standards. Then it goes to the roundtable. Then it comes to the board. And I even committed in the timeline that we gave you to give you monthly updates and reports. And we're going to go forth, and we can talk about what you would like to see in those reports. But it's the department's role. And with this motion is made, I will have to deem it improper because it does not follow the statutory obligations of the department. And so I'm just letting you know that if you make the motion, Brad, and there's a second, I will have to rule it improper and go forward. And it has nothing to do with actually getting this process done. It has everything to do with whose role it is. It is the department's role. It is not the board staff role to engage in this.
I'd like to make a couple comments to that. Specifically, I'm bringing the resolution not because I'm trying to elevate board staff. I am genuinely concerned about the board's ability to meet its obligation. You've mentioned to me on a number of times there's been opportunities for input. I in my first meeting in July, I remember raising the issue of higher ed being involved, and I was requested to provide some names. I did that. I didn't even get a follow-up call. I got the call on October 1st, heading into the October 2nd meeting, asking me again for the names and phone numbers for those folks. Only to come in on October 2nd and be handed a list of committee people. When I met with department staff yesterday, and they repeated this again, contact with folks was finally initiated, and the first groundbreaking training was done on October the 24th. And I'm just saying, House Enrolled Act 1427 had been signed into law since back in the spring. My concern is that things are getting away from us, and as a board to do this well, and we talk about getting the cart in front of the horse, We've got to get this horse right, and I'm worried right now that we're on a pathway because both my knowledge and experiential base tells me that soliciting the input the way we are from field practitioners, that's important, but we're not going to get the objective evaluation that we need to concretely say as a board, these are college and career ready standards. We can certainly have a higher ed group rubber stamp it, but I don't think that was the intent. I think if you read the legislative intent written in the letter by Senator Scott Schneider and Representative Rhonda Rhodes, it was very clear that the board would take the responsibility to evaluate those standards. I don't think, this is where I would respectfully disagree with the superintendent. I don't think there's anything in my resolution that stands in contrast to what you read. The department certainly can move forward on that. They're certainly going to evaluate and they're going to weigh in, and they should. They're going to say, as a department, we have taken our approach, but I don't think it prevents the board from taking actions to say we have a level of due diligence that we're also responsible with so that we can evaluate all that, receive the testimony from the public. And so with that, I would respectfully, you've indicated what you're going to do, but I'm going to respectfully submit this as a motion and ask that the board approve the resolution as I've presented it.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I rule this motion improper. The resolution charges the board to undertake activities that it does not have statutory authority to perform, and in some case are activities the department is statutorily obligated to perform. I move that we table this question while I seek an advisory opinion. Do I have a second?
Madam Secretary, may I have your attention here? Could we hear from our board attorney, please?
You know what?
Please?
No.
Why?
And the reason we're not going to hear from the board attorney is because I'm telling you that this motion is improper.
Well,
and I'm going to seek advisory counsel as to the role of the department in the review of the standards. This motion clearly inserts the board staff actually overseeing the entire process and deciding how it's going to happen. And that's not the purview of the board staff or the board, in essence. And so I'm ruling it improper.
Can we speak?
Can I ask a question?
You may.
And I mean this with respect. I really do. I don't know the law. I don't read the law. I teach 6th grade language arts, and I do a great job of it.
I'm going to table this.
But you have your attorney, and you mentioned with Gordon last week, this is your attorney, and you're allowed to ask her questions during the meeting. And I'm being very sincere. Why am I not allowed to ask my attorney questions during the meeting?
Well, we have.
I'm being very sincere in my question. And I'm just asking about why are we not allowed?
Well, here's what I don't want to have. I don't think that we should be having, and this happened at the last meeting. We have debates every meeting between the State Board of Ed lawyers and the department's lawyers. It continues and continues and continues and continues. So I'm actually I'm taking this to the Attorney General is who I'm taking it to, because there needs to be clarity about the role of the department. And I read the statute, and the role of the department is very clear. So I'm asking for this to be tabled so that clarification can be sought from the Attorney General to give an opinion. Because, and it's unfortunate that we're even having the dialogue, because Brad, as frustrated as you might be with actually having communications and getting information, I put this on the agenda for 3 times now. I put on the timeline the agenda for 3 different times, and it was at the end of every meeting, and nobody had really had any comment to give about it. And so there's frustration on both sides. But when we come right down to it, the department, in my opinion and my legal staff's, we have a statutory obligation to review these standards. And so I'm making a motion to table this so that we don't continue to have the back and forth with the legal staff at this meeting, so that we can go ahead and get a ruling or get an advisory opinion, I guess is what it's called. Michelle? Michelle?
It just seems a little inappropriate for the department legal team to be able to advise you as chair and for the board to not have an opportunity to hear counsel. And about the back and forth,
Michelle,
I do want to remind
Michelle,
that last week,
Michelle,
before we had that.
Michelle,
yes,
please sit down. I haven't recognized you yet. Thank you.
Don't you think that's important? You just recognized your attorney.
I haven't recognized any
You were
attorneys.
just visiting. I mean, truthfully.
I have not given
Let's
her
be fair
advice
here.
while I've been sitting at this table.
Still waiting. Just wait, please. Actually, I'm going to take a quick recess so that we can, I'm going to come back to this. I've already deemed it to be improper, and so we're going to move on here when we come back, but we're going to take a very brief recess, and we'll be back here at 12:05. Thank you. So I'm going to that the motion is still considered to be improper, and I will be seeking an advisory opinion regarding the topic.
Madam Superintendent, could I make two quick comments related to this before we leave this issue? I'd just like to point out, so it's in the minutes, I'm disappointed that my motion won't be given a chance to be heard and acted on by my colleagues on the board. Two things that I do want to make sure is perfectly clear and known. I have, in my opinion, and we may disagree, actively tried to pursue, both in our public meetings and through private email communication, to get some insight into the process, because we all have to make a vote at some point here on these standards, and I do take this extremely serious. These are probably this is probably one of the most important votes to me next to A to F is getting these standards right. Our teachers are looking to us because it's going to drive the assessment decision next, and it's going to ultimately drive A to F. I think I've tried to raise some legitimate concerns about the process. You and I agree on some areas where we can strengthen the process, but not only have we reached the point where a resolution is needed, I believe it's needed because of the very lack of the communication. Secondly, I'm disappointed because on November the 8th, at the end of the meeting, I made it really clear that my intent was to work with SBOE staff to come up with a resolution and to take action on it. I did that in good faith, and I just respectfully disagree. There was clearly some consultation with department staff. I'm not able to consult with the board council, and I feel like I'm being somewhat treated pejorative in nature on this motion, and I just want to say that for the record.
And I concur with you, the great importance of this topic. However, the motion as it's written involves the CECI staff being totally involved in actually overseeing the entire review standards process, and that is under question. So with that, we're going to move on.
Point of order.
We're going to move on.
Point of order.
We're going to move on. Next is the Common Course.
No, it's not going to work that way.
Point of order regarding
Respectfully,
regarding
I'd just
what?
like to maybe provide a workaround. I'd like to offer a suggestion. You know, I think there's an opportunity here to consider the motion as well as addressing your concerns. Would it be possible for us to amend Brad's resolution to make it subject to Attorney General review, such that the resolution, should the Attorney General determine that the board has overstepped its bounds, would have the opportunity to make it null and void. The resolution, however, if the Attorney General deems that it's appropriate, then we've moved the process forward, and the resolution would be germane.
I've already met with the Attorney General, and I'm sure that we'll get an advisory opinion and fairly quickly that we could bring it back.
But
So
this way
thank you.
your concerns are addressed.
So
we
thank
can
you.
keep moving
Thank you
forward.
for your suggestion. I am ruling the motion improper, and I'll seek advisory opinion.
But you're not listening. We have a motion and a second, and we have a way forward. And the board, this is the board, and the board wants to vote on this matter that's very important. It's a responsibility. You're not, this is bad governance, this is bad leadership, this is inappropriate. Your board just wants to vote on this. If you think it's illegal, take it to the Attorney General. We wouldn't want to do anything illegal. We're with you on that. We actually agree with you in that regard. We wouldn't want to do something illegal. We want to do these standards very well. We want to hit timelines. We want to have expertise. So we have a motion and we have it seconded.
An improper motion, an improper motion means that the motion before us may be.
It's not improper. It's from the board about a board responsibility. So you can't.
You can't say it's improper.
Yeah, you can't define. You can't do that. That's not the proper role of a chair.
Our role is to vote.
Let's vote.
And if it's improper, we'll vote no. So let the board speak. Why are we sitting here through hours and hours if we cannot vote on issues we want to vote on? So if you can convince us.
It's a public open meeting.
To amend it subject to, I think that, it addresses, I think, the superintendent's concerns as well as the board's and the public's. Is that something?
Yes,
If so, I think you need to rescind and make a new one.
No, just amend it.
Or amend your motion, just so I think there's a comfort level with everyone, which I think is what everybody wants.
I would be happy to amend it, and I don't think what I'm proposing is in conflict with what the
Truly,
superintendent read by the
truly,
department.
an improper motion means that the motion itself interferes with statutory obligations. And that's why I'm ruling it improper. So I'm going to rule it improper, and then we're going to go seek the advisory opinion. And it can be brought, whatever happens after that happens. But I'm going to rule it improper.
Can we call for a vote on top of that? Sure.
Can you what?
Can we call for a vote?
For an improper motion? No.
The
chair rules that it's improper.
You're not the Attorney General. The Attorney General determines that. We should be allowed to make votes and to vote. We have been appointed, we are a public entity. We have the right to vote. No chair can stop us from voting. And it's very upsetting to be at meetings every single month, spend hours and hours like all my colleagues do, and then we're not allowed to vote?
I think
the Attorney General makes that determination if it's improper. We need to vote.
The motion is improper, and we're going to move forward. We're next doing the Common Core guidance to schools, and
I'd
Sarah...
like to call the question.
Excuse me, excuse me.
If I could, just as counsel to the board, there's just not really anything in our procedures that allows for the process that's happening right now. Our procedures that were adopted in May of 2013 don't include the ability of the chair or any other member of the State Board of Education to determine that a motion is improper and then not allow a vote on it. And again, the idea that you have counsel sitting beside you, talking in your ear and making notes to you when we're precluding the board from hearing from its counsel and your counsel as well, I think that's cause for concern.
You're going down the wrong track here. It's just not, it's not well run. You can't behave like this. Okay, this is not leadership. We have to work together to advance education. This is about standards. We're not doing something illegal. It's a genuine concern. It's a concern that was discussed properly, and I think we should just take the vote.
As the chair, I'm going, this meeting is adjourned.
No, there has to be a vote for that.
This meeting is adjourned.
There has to be a vote on adjournment.
This meeting is adjourned.
Counsel, does there have to be a vote on adjournment?
You can't adjourn without a second, can you?
This meeting is adjourned.
You can't adjourn a meeting without.
It's not adjourned. I'm staying.
The meeting is adjourned.
It's not adjourned. So if you leave, we're going to continue.
The meeting is adjourned.
I'm sorry. You can't do that. Michelle, may I ask you a question, please?
Yes.
If the